Welcome to the Surgical Edge podcast for surgical insights, reviews, discussions, and to stay updated. Let's dive in.
So if you're a doctor, and I think particularly if you're working in surgery, you navigate a reality that, well, very few other people can really understand. I'm talking about adverse outcomes. They're this profoundly difficult, often deeply personal part of clinical practice. They feel inevitable, and yet when they happen, they just hit everyone. The patient, the whole team, and most acutely, the surgeon.
It's that exact moment, isn't it? It's where the technical skill sort of ends and where true professional integrity really has to begin. How you handle that moment of unexpected harm is what defines you, both ethically and, of course, legally.
And that is exactly why we're here today. Our mission for this deep dive is to give you a robust and actionable framework for managing these incidents. We've pulled together guidance from the GMC, the Royal College of Surgeons, the CQC, and some really cutting-edge literature.
The goal is to give you a clear path for meeting those professional obligations and, I think most importantly, for driving real organizational learning from these events.
And we're not talking about rare events, are we? There was this huge 2024 cohort study in the BMJ that was, well, it was staggering.
It really was. It found that adverse events affect more than 1/3 of patients admitted for surgery. 1/3. But the really sobering number, the one that should make us all stop and think, is that nearly 60% of those were judged to be potentially preventable.
60%. Wow. That makes this conversation incredibly urgent.
It does.
Okay, before we dive in, we have to put up our mandatory reminder. This deep dive synthesizes information for educational reference only. All clinical practitioners must, and I repeat must, follow your specific local institutional policies and guidelines in clinical practice.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. The terminology here is just so critical, especially when you're deciding if disclosure is even required. We have to be crystal clear on the definition.
Exactly. I mean, you're called into a meeting about an incident. How do you even start to delineate what happened? What is an adverse event?
Yeah.
And how is it different from a standard known surgical complication?
Right. So an adverse event is defined as unintended harm to a patient that occurs in the healthcare setting, and, this is the key bit, is not due to the patient's underlying disease process itself.
Okay, that's the first layer.
That's the first layer. The second, more complex layer is that the definition actually includes known unavoidable complications, the things you consent the patient for. If the specific way that harm manifested was unexpected or unintended in that specific context.
Okay, so let's try and unpack that distinction a bit. If I do an appendectomy, I consent the patient for a bowel leak. It happens maybe 1% of the time. That's a known complication. When does that cross the line and become an adverse event?
It's all about the manifestation. It's when it crosses a line into the truly unexpected. So if you do a routine procedure and maybe there's a recognized technical difficulty, the patient develops a small managed anastomotic leak, a known risk. That might just be a standard complication. But if during that same procedure, a major vessel is inadvertently injured because of a technical lapse, and it requires a massive transfusion and unplanned return to theater, well, that is clearly unintended and unexpected in how it manifested.
So even though bleeding is a risk, the severity, the manner of the harm is what makes it an adverse event.
Exactly. The manner, not just the existence of the risk, that's the filter you have to run it through.
And when you look at the sheer volume of these events, it's pretty clear it's not just about what happens in the theater, is it?
Not at all. I mean, when you break it down, almost half, about 49% are surgical procedure related, yes. But the other half is, well, it's everywhere else. Adverse drug events make up over a quarter.
26%.
And healthcare-associated infections are another 12%. It's widespread.
And the location, that was surprising. I think most of us assume all the harm is generated right there, under the bright lights of the OR.
You'd think so, but no, half of all adverse events happen in general ward settings. Only about a quarter happen in the operating theater.
That speaks volumes, doesn't it? And when you remember that 60% are potentially preventable, it forces you to look way beyond individual error.
Absolutely. It screams system failure. And look at who's involved. Attending physicians were involved in 90% of incidents, sure. But the data also shows nurses and residents are involved in half or more of these cases.
Right. Nurses in 59%, residents in 50%.
So these events are intrinsically multidisciplinary. It just reinforces that idea that these outcomes stem from these latent system failures. Things like flawed protocols, poor handoffs, staffing issues, not just one surgeon making one mistake.
Which takes us directly to the concept that's meant to manage all this, the duty of candor. Let's talk about this. It's a cornerstone of integrity, really.
It is. And when we talk about candor, we mean total honesty, sincerity, freedom from deceit. It's the absolute opposite of spin, right? It's not selective disclosure to control the narrative.
And every surgeon has to navigate two distinct duties here.
That's right. First, there's the professional duty. This is the ethical obligation from the General Medical Council.
And that applies to any harm or distress.
Any. It's very broad. If a patient suffers harm or distress, the ethical rule is clear. You explain fully and promptly, you put it right if you can, you offer an apology, and you explain what you're doing to stop it from happening again.
But then you have the big one, the statutory duty of candor. This one carries the legal weight of Regulation 20.
And this is only triggered by what's called a notifiable safety incident. It sounds much heavier because it is.
It's a legal tripwire.
It is. The threshold varies a little bit between, say, the NHS and private care, but broadly, it's triggered by specific significant levels of harm.
Okay, can you translate those thresholds for us, something we can absorb quickly without reading a long list of regulatory text?
Think of it this way. It's triggered by outcomes that cause prolonged or permanent negative changes to a patient's life. So for the NHS, that's death, severe harm, or moderate harm. For private care, it's a bit more descriptive. It includes things like sensory or motor impairment lasting at least 28 days, or permanent changes to body structure. The key is lasting impact.
So this brings us back to that unexpected test. If I have a known complication, but it crosses that severity threshold, say, a patient gets moderate harm from a recognized risk, does that automatically trigger the statutory duty?
Not automatically, but usually yes. The key phrase from the CQC is that the incident was neither intended nor expected to occur if the standard of care had been met.
Let's use that bowel injury example again.
Perfect. So bowel injury is a recognized complication. But if it happens because of an unusual difficulty and it requires an unplanned, urgent return to theater, well, it was unintended and unexpected in how it manifested. That specific failure triggers the statutory duty because it resulted in harm that wasn't intended or typically expected in that patient's scenario.
That's a complex judgment call to make in a really stressful situation. So what's the framework to guide that decision?
The best practical framework comes from Wheeler and colleagues. They propose a simple, ethically grounded question. Is this significant harm that a reasonable patient would want to know about? If the answer is yes, you disclose. It's the same standard of materiality we use for consent.
Okay, give us a really clear contrast. Two surgical examples. We need to see where that line is in the real world.
All right. Scenario 1. You're repairing an inguinal hernia. During the procedure, you realize you've inadvertently divided the patient's appendix. You thought it was another structure. You manage it perfectly, resect it. The patient is totally fine. The harm is invisible. But you still inadvertently performed a procedure the patient did not consent to. That's a significant harm to their bodily integrity. Disclosure must occur.
Because the patient was deprived of the knowledge, regardless of the clinical outcome.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, scenario 2. During a complex liver mobilization, you use diathermy and create an unusually large but superficial burn on the liver capsule. You manage it immediately. It's well controlled. The patient has no subsequent issues from that specific burn.
So in that case,
that incident would not ordinarily pass the threshold for formal statutory disclosure because the ultimate consequence didn't meet that definition of moderate or severe harm.
Okay, that makes it much clearer. So if an incident does cross that statutory threshold, the conversation you have isn't just an informal chat. There's a very structured process.
Yes, and that structure is all about restoring trust. The CQC outlines 8 core requirements for that meeting. We don't need to read the whole list, but let's focus on the bits that surgeons find the most challenging.
What are the points that often trip people up in the moment?
I'd say the first one is timing. The initial disclosure has to be as soon as reasonably practicable. Any delay just looks like a cover-up. The second is the need for a truthful account in clear, non-technical language. No jargon, no obfuscation.
And the third?
And the third, the one that causes the most internal conflict, is the apology.
Let's focus on that. I know so many surgeons hesitate. They're afraid that by apologizing, they're legally admitting negligence.
This is a critical misconception, and we have to dismantle it. A sincere apology is a human acknowledgement of suffering. It is not an admission of negligence or fault. In fact, the evidence overwhelmingly shows that timely, transparent disclosure with a genuine, heartfelt apology tends to reduce litigation.
Really?
Absolutely. Patients who feel respected and heard are far less likely to sue than those who feel they've been lied to or just abandoned.
So the apology is a tool for integrity, not a legal trap. That is a vital distinction. Okay, let's shift focus now. Let's talk about the unacknowledged reality on the other side of this, the psychological toll on the professional, the second victim phenomenon.
Yes, the suffering that happens in the healthcare professional after the event. And historically, it's just been ignored or dismissed as, just stress. But the research it's truly striking.
How striking are we talking?
Some research has found that surgeons who experience these outcomes suffer post-traumatic stress symptoms that are equal in severity to military personnel returning from combat.
Wow.
These aren't just bad days. This is a profound psychological injury. Yet so many people just internalize it because of professional stigma.
It's that culture where showing vulnerability is seen as weakness, isn't it?
Mm.
So what are the key things that surgeons should look for in themselves or in their colleagues after a major incident?
The emotional core is this intense guilt, shame, anxiety. Cognitively, you see this crippling rumination, just playing the incident over and over, intrusive thoughts. And then behaviorally, things like social isolation, sleep disturbance, and the self-doubt that bleeds into your future decisions.
And that leads to something even worse for future patients, doesn't it? Defensive medicine.
Absolutely. That's the huge systemic risk, this natural but very damaging shift toward defensive medicine practices. You see people ordering unnecessary tests, delaying care, or critically actively avoiding high-risk procedures, even when they're the best option for the patient.
So the trauma of the second victim creates risk for the next patient.
It does, which is why organizations have to provide explicit structural support. It can't just be a phone number for an employee assistance program.
So what does that structural support look like?
Well, first, immediate access to dedicated mental health counseling, specifically for post-traumatic stress. Second, formal peer support systems are essential. Something like the Royal College of Surgeons Support Program, where you can talk to a colleague who gets it without fear of it going on your record.
And leadership has to set the tone, right? Cultivate a non-blaming culture.
They have to. By explicitly stating that adverse events are seen as system problems to be solved, not individual failures to be punished. That also means protected time away from clinical duties right after an incident. You need time to process before you go back into the environment where the trauma happened.
That non-blaming culture is the perfect bridge to our final section, learning for prevention, specifically root cause analysis, or RCA.
RCA is the engine of learning. It's the structured investigation process focused entirely on finding the underlying system failures, not just the immediate mistake made by the person closest to the patient.
So instead of asking, who cut the wrong thing, RCA asks, why did the system defenses fail? Why were two surgeons unable to confirm the anatomy before the cut was made?
Precisely. Think of it less like a courtroom and more like forensic engineering on the entire system. It is fundamentally non-blaming because blame stops learning.
So can you walk us through what a good RCA actually looks like? What are the steps?
It's very systematic. First, the team maps a detailed step-by-step timeline of events. Second, they analyze all the cause and effect relationships, technical factors, human factors like fatigue, and bigger system factors like equipment or policy.
That sounds like a mountain of information.
Yeah, it is, which is why the third step is so crucial. You have to identify the actual root causes, the underlying system failures that, if you fix them, will prevent it from happening again. Then, finally, you develop concrete recommendations and assign them to specific people with clear success metrics.
It sounds comprehensive, but I'm sure it has challenges.
Right.
What can compromise an RCA?
The biggest one is hindsight bias. When you're looking back, everything seems obvious. Oh, they should have seen that. And that biases the whole investigation away from system issues and back toward individual blame.
And I imagine the other big issue is just staff honesty, information bias.
Absolutely. If that non-blaming culture isn't real, people won't disclose the messy reality of what actually happened. And you also have to accept that these events are complex. Isolating one single root cause is often an artificial exercise, even though the report demands it.
And just practically, how long does this take? And who should be on the team?
A formal RCA usually takes 2 to 3 months. And the team needs clinical experts, but crucially, to maintain credibility, it has to exclude anyone who is directly implicated in the incident.
So when you put this all together, from defining the event to the RCA, what does this framework really mean for the culture of a surgical department?
It means accepting that adverse outcomes are, unfortunately, inherent to what we do. Surgery is complex and high stakes, but our professional integrity isn't defined by the incident, It's defined by our response.
Transparency, compassion, investigation, and prevention.
Exactly. Transparency for the patient, compassion for the clinician, a systematic investigation of the causes, and an unwavering commitment to making sure it doesn't happen again.
So the duty of candor, then.
Mhm.
It shouldn't be seen as this heavy legal burden or a moment of crushing vulnerability. We should reframe it as an opportunity.
An opportunity, yes.
It's the single greatest opportunity we have to reaffirm that honesty and integrity are the bedrock of the doctor-patient relationship, and, maybe more powerfully, that candor is the central driver for making the entire system safer for everyone.
That honesty is paramount. And if you found this deep dive helpful and informative, please don't forget to share it with at least one of your colleagues or friends. Let's spread the word about these critical frameworks.
Also, check out our YouTube channel and our other social media pages for more system deep dives just like this one, where we break down these complex clinical realities into clear, actionable knowledge.
And remember, this content is for educational reference only. You must always follow your local institutional policies and guidelines in clinical practice.
Thank you for diving deep with us.
Thank you for listening to the Surgical Edge podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Help us grow and deliver even more relevant surgical content by pressing the support button. Your contribution truly makes a difference. And don't forget to share with us your advice, feedback, and the topics you would like us to include.